All right. Good evening, everyone. So let's start with today's class. Just give me one moment. Let me also check at my end. Uh, right. Okay. So the last class that we had, firstly, just a quick intro. A series of classes were conducted by me, by us, essentially about the kind of questions that are asked by CAT. We focused on RCs, and we also discussed some VA questions in the introductory classes. Uh, in the last class, I covered in the final run up what is expected out of us from the RC question type in terms of performance, what is expected out of us, what is required from us to perform at the optimum level in those 40 minutes, or rather, let's say 30 minutes, provided we leave 10 minutes for the VA questions. So that brings me to today. Today, we'll be discussing VA questions. The remaining time in the VRC section would be taken up by the VA questions. Before we start with the VA questions, I briefly want to discuss some strategy around them in terms of what is expected by the exam from us and how we can integrate VA questions in our solving process. Those of you who are taking the exam this weekend, perhaps, or the next weekend on 24th, I just want all of you to type in specific doubts if you have any, so that I can try and address them during the course of the class. One moment, please. All right. So let's start with the introduction to these questions first. VA questions are, verbal ability questions. Verbal ability questions, we can say, verbal ability questions can be split into two broad types. The first is the para summary type, in which we're expected to summarize or to identify the right summary for a paragraph, the best possible summary out of a given four. Then the other question type, which I think is one question type, and I'll make the case for why it's actually one question type that we are asked from a different way, right? So the second question type, if you notice, is the para jumble odd, and the para completion question type. The reason why I think that all these three are one question type, broadly speaking, is because they're checking one fundamental aspect of the actual reading process. I'll get to that one fundamental aspect that's common to all three question types. But the method to solve each question type accurately is slightly different from question to question. Like parajumble has a few differences as compared to parajumble odd, and paracompletion also has a few differences. I'll discuss how those are common. So we'll start by discussing the para summary question, but I want to discuss both of these question types from the point of view of, first is the strategy around the exam. I discussed this in the past class, so I'll cover this very briefly. We're expected to maintain a certain speed, an optimum speed, and the ability to be methodical under pressure. Uh, should I do VA first, as after RC I get tired and not able to think straight? We know that's a good doubt, and that's something that I'm planning to address. So, right, maintaining speed and being methodical under pressure. This is what is expected out of us from the entire VRC section. The second point, being methodical, is relatively more important for VARC because, unlike, let's say, in logical reasoning or in quant, the question types themselves impose a method on us, right? For quant, it could be a formula. For logical reasoning, it could be a data set of, let's say, some railways between two stations, something like that. So the method is imposed by these disciplines. This is not the same with VARC. So we have to ensure that we are being methodical under pressure, right? So these are two broad skills. Now, what is training? How to practice it? Last time I'd covered this from the point of view of RCs. This time I'll cover it broadly from the point of view of the entire VRC thing, and specifically for the VA question type also. So one is, do I solve VA first? Do I solve RC first? My preference usually has been to solve VA first. There are two important words in that: my preference and usually is to solve VA first. My preference is important because based on strengths and weaknesses, I usually can attempt the entire paper, right? So since I can attempt the entire paper, I can decide where to ideally start. My preference is starting with VA questions and then going to RC questions. The reason why I focused on the words my preference is everyone does not need to have the same preference. Everyone does not need to have the same way of solving the, you can try solving VA questions later, which also I have done with different kind of success. I usually prefer starting with VA questions because I start with parajumble, odd, especially because these don't have negative marking. My accuracy is fairly good. So I know that I'm going to get to it's like a free hit from the point of view of it will take maybe a minute and a half. My accuracy, like I said, is fairly good and it does not have negative marking. So this is a good place for me to start. That being said, others can start different ways. You can start with RC and then go to VA. The most important thing, Vinu, I'd like to tell you, and all the others also, if you're taking the exam next year, nothing like it, you can practice whichever method. Maybe start by solving VA first, then RC, or by solving RC first and then VA. But my like if you're taking the exam this year, it's in 2 weeks' time. I don't recommend making any changes, any sudden changes. If you've practiced with solving RC first and then VA, and by practice, I mean you've taken a lot of mock tests and you've solved some previous year papers, I don't want you to change anything up too soon, too close to the exam. All right. Now, what is training? How to practice it? I discussed this in the prior class. We'll discuss this about the mechanics of specifically VA questions. I expect you to solve several questions from previous year papers. Timing and for speed I discussed in the prior class. So please go and take a look at the prior class because speed is going to be a challenge for all of us. I don't want to waste my time discussing speed again. So look at the class from the previous week taken by me. All right. So how do I practice VA questions? What is expected from me? Ideally, in the last few days that we are going to essentially work on VA, we want to work on the same ability of simplification and evaluation that we did for RCs, right? And RC is basically a longer passage, longer than this, right? This is what we looked at for RCs. The same idea of simplification and evaluation applies to VA questions. This is what is broadly required for me to practice for questions, preferably questions from previous year, right? So practice PYQs. While practicing PYQs, we are looking to establish a similar pattern of simplifying and evaluating information that we don't have any context for. For example, you don't know what the topic of this para summary question or this top passage is. You don't know what the subtopic is, right? These we would have to read and reread and then identify. All right. So for the para summary question, we'll think about how to apply a certain method for the para summary question. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to achieve two things here. I'm trying to tell you that solve PYQs, and while solving them, how to practice. You practice repeatedly a certain method, and then you analyze if you've gotten the question wrong. So what we are focusing on is the method that we need to apply for different question types in the VARC paper. We have already seen the RC question type and what kind of method of reading is required. And a similar type of reading ability is required where we eventually should be able to simplify and evaluate any kind of information, text-based information that is given to us. Any kind meaning it could be on any topic really, and it could have any level of difficulty in terms of language. It can be really hard English, it could be easy, right? So this is what we need to do, simplify and evaluate information. Right, so let's start by a method for the para summary question. This method is like a checklist, right? And I want you to follow this checklist and follow it in this specific order. And the reason why I'm asking all of you all to follow a certain method and with a certain order is because we want to have a way of solving that can be replicated for maximum accuracy. It doesn't matter what kind of a question you can get. For example, let's say someone really likes reading about history, right? And you get a question on the passages based on history. That's great. But what if you don't like history? And then your reading ability is going to save you, because in a question type that you don't like and you want to still quickly identify what could be an ideal summary, there needs to be a certain method for our reading, and there needs to be a pattern we can replicate. So I'm going to repeat a pattern of solving the question. What I want us to try to do is, and we've done this for passages before, like if you attend my prior classes, we've already done this for long passages, 450 word passages. Um, all right. I'm just going through some of the doubts. Firstly, specific question types of VA I'm already going to discuss, right? So those I'll discuss. Some of you have asked broad questions about strategy, and just generally not getting enough questions right. So let me say a few words about what affects our accuracy finally, right? There are a few stages, and the reason I'll also try and rope in as to what we're discussing about para summary questions. See, what we get in the exam is text-based information of different length. This could be up to 450 to 600 words if it's an RC. This could be up to 150 to 200 words if it's a para summary, which is a VA question type, and 150 to 200 words for para jumble, odd, para completion, right? But it's all text based information. We need to do a few things with it. For all of it, we need to figure out what is the topic of discussion, correct? And we need to figure out what specifically about that topic the author is trying to say. So I should be able to point out for any length cut text, whether it's a RC, whether it's a para summary or para jumble, etc., etc. What is the topic of discussion? And about that topic, what is the author categorically saying? This I need to identify. Now, the ideal scenario is, and of course, there are a few inherent challenges where reading on screen is always a little uncomfortable. You can't mark anything, etc., etc., etc. Right? I'll get to those when I read the para summary question. But my point is that these blanks should be filled based on information in the passage using the author's words. I am not planning to use my own language. I'm planning to use the author's language as much as possible. So that way, there's no interpretation or reinterpretation based on my words. I'm using the author's language. So what I'm trying to achieve is, for all of these question types, I'm trying to achieve a evidence or objectivity based method, right? I want to have some piece of evidence, topic X, that the author has spoken about. About topic X, author has said Y. Like, I want some objective piece of evidence so that I can compare and evaluate information. All right. So, people talk about general accuracy. What happens is, now I'm supposed to read a passage of varying length, like I said. I don't have any context of the passage. I don't know what the topic is, what the discussion is. And I now need to start answering questions. Either I need to rearrange these sentences, or I need to figure out why three options are incorrect and why one option is correct, right? All of this requires that I use and mark these words: specific pieces of evidence. What does this mean, right? What do I mean by specific piece of evidence? For every decision that you take in the exam, and this is specifically for those students who are saying, I've reached this upper border of my capabilities, I'm not improving beyond a certain point, what do I do? There are two factors. One is speed, and which is generally solving speed, but the other is having the ability to solve methodically when you're running out of time, under pressure. So performing under pressure. To perform, what should be the target of your performance? What should be the objective of your performance? The objective of your performance is that every decision you take, right, you're saying that these sentences are best arranged as, let's say, 4 3 2, 1. This is the best possible arrangement of these sentences. If you're taking this decision, then there should be some specific reason as to why you're saying this is the only way to arrange these sentences. The reason why I've marked those 4 boxes is to show you that there is a certain overlap of information that should tell you that this is the only thing. This is the only possible sequence. That means that decision has been backed by specific pieces of evidence, right? Here you have 4 pieces of evidence in each sentence. Same way, if you're declaring an option as incorrect, you should have some specific reasons for declaring options A, B, C incorrect. The hard part is that there'll be some problematic word in option D also. What you want to have the ability to do is to take this piece of evidence, right, and check it against the passage. Is it acceptable? And if you find, all right, I find a similar piece of evidence in the passage, so I know that even though this is problematic, it's somewhat justified by the passage. So for every decision, what I've marked by those words is to tell you that for every decision, I have a specific piece of evidence. Now, why is this important, Vinu and others? Is when you're running short of time, when you aren't in the right frame of mind, either because the first few questions went wrong, maybe you're doubting some decision, maybe you decided to solve RC2, you started with RC2 and then realized that maybe you doubt your choice. So anything could lead you to actually start thinking about time in a negative or a nervous way, and then the ability to take decisions using objective pieces of evidence like this goes for a toss. That's what I'm saying, right? So what you want to have the ability to do is, doesn't matter how much pressure you're under, you should use specific pieces of evidence for your decisions. All right, so I'll talk about that method as to how I'm going to use specific pieces of evidence for our decisions. Those of you who are asking about how to make improvements, all I can tell you within a really short amount of time. In the prior class, I've told you about doing short tests. I've discussed this many times with students. Short tests imply like try and solve 6 questions in maybe 10 minutes, 6 questions, say 4 RC questions and 2 VA questions. Take any questions and try and solve them in, like, let's say 10 minutes, 11 minutes. That's a good way to work on time. And that's a good way to learn to get used to pressure, right? But that's like a general tip for speed and general solving ability. But those of you who are saying what quick changes to make, I've discussed this again in prior classes. I want you to think about just being really methodical, looking for evidence, even when you're under pressure and losing out on time. Once you accept that and practice that a few times, what you're going to realize that even though it feels like you're actually slowing down, you aren't slowing down much. Your decisions are being that much more well thought out. That this does not mean solve slowly. I do not mean solve slowly. I mean solve fast, but look for certain piece of evidence. Once you have some faith in your accuracy, overall you'll notice that you'll perform broadly a little better. In the given amount of time, I just expect all of you all to realize that we're looking for specific pieces of evidence. All right. Okay. Now, just Flash also had asked a similar doubt. Now, let me start out by discussing each question type, right? So now what I'm trying to do here is, let me go back to the prior slide. Okay. Now what we are going to do is we are going to reduce this passage, which is a 150 to 200 word passage, to this idea that about a certain topic, the author says something specific, right? This is a previous year passage. And if you notice, I haven't given you options yet. I first just simply want you to reduce the topic to this, which is a certain topic the author is talking about. About that topic, the author is saying something really specific and certain, right? If you notice, I've given you 4 blanks for options A, B, C, D, E also, in the sense that we are going to be given 4 options of some sort. You could create 100 options, right? And all those options are possible interpretations, possible summarizations of the author's information, right? There will be something, since you're reducing information, you're taking a 150 to 200 word passage and you're reducing it to a sentence. So since you're doing that, there is going to be some loss of information, right? There will be some loss in clarity, some loss in specificity, but there's going to be some net loss of information. Since there's net loss of information, all options A, B, C, D, E, F, G, they're all essentially problematic. So the challenge for the para summary question is to say that, yes, I find option D also problematic, for example, but options A, B, and C have very specific problems with them, right? And those specific problems range from either there is a factual mistake or an opinion based mistake, meaning the author's opinion or fact has been restated incorrectly, or coming to this sentence, which is about topic A, author says B. The second problem with the incorrect option in a para summary question is the author's main point is not correctly recorded or not recorded at all, right? So first, let's just go through the passage and figure out blank A and B. I don't want all of you all to write this down. I'm just giving all of you all a minute and a half to read this passage. So please get started. All right. So I think everyone has had time to go through the passage. Just yes, Sanatan, I'll mention. Mehul, I've spoken about speed in the prior class, so you can please go back to that class and pay attention to the discussion on speed. It's a very expansive topic, so just watch the prior 2 or 3 classes. You'll get a good idea of what I say when practice speed. When I say how to practice speed. So now we want to figure out with this passage what the author's topic is, right? Blank A, and what about the topic does the author say, which is blank B. We need to fill these blanks using the author's own words, right? When you're reading about reading, also in each RC class that I've done so far, I've actually spent a lot of time discussing this. When we read from the point of view of the exam, it's a specific kind of reading. For each sentence, I'm trying to figure out not what the author is trying to tell me, but rather why the author is taking up my time. Why is the author talking to me? What is the specific aspect of each sentence the author wants to convey to me? The first sentence is talking about petitioning being an expeditious democratic tradition. Suppose we didn't know the meaning of the word expeditious. It means to do something fast. But even if we didn't know the word, petitioning is a democratic tradition which is used frequently in prior centuries by which citizens can bring issues directly to governments. So the first sentence tells us petition is a kind of democratic tradition that brings issues directly to government. So the why of the first sentence is defining what petitions are and you know what they're supposed to achieve. So defining petitions is the first sentence. The second sentence, as expressions of collective voice, they support procedural democracy by shaping agendas. So impact of petitions, shaping democracy. They can also recruit citizens to causes, give voice to the voteless, apply the discipline of rhetorical argument that clarifies a point of view. So they can clarify a point of view, recruit citizens. So again, impact. on, let's say, society. So wider impact on democracy, then impact on society. By contrast, elections are limited in several respects. So now petitions are being compared to elections, right? And elections are, by contrast, limited. And we are told why elections fall short of a representative democracy. Voters' choice are not specific, etc. We are told in the end, which tells us that elections are episodic. So versus petitioning, and elections are time bound, whereas uh, petitions are expeditious. Or to simplify for those, petitions are something that citizens can take up whenever they want, right? Whenever they want. Now, let's look at the words that the author may use, as blank A and blank B. So we are trying to rely on the author's own words. Petition, the topic is petitioning, or the concept of petitioning in democracies. Uh, about this petitioning in democracies, first is petitions are expressions of collective voice. So this is a definition that the author had given, right? They support procedural democracy. So of democratic impact of petitions. By contrast, elections are episodic. So comparison between elections and petitions. So I don't expect all of you to fill these blanks, but what I want all of you to realize is we are actually not simply getting a rough gist. The incorrect tendency that we have for VARCs, since we are, always falling short of time, we create a rough gist of what we have understood from the reading material, and then we proceed to the questions. If I proceeded to the questions too soon, right? If I proceeded to the options too soon, all of these are created by the examiner. So they cannot be trusted. The options cannot be trusted. So what is needed is, when I see the passage first, I read it, and not to get a general gist. Right? I don't want a general gist. What I want is this third stage, which is a specific aspect of the passage, which is the main point of the author, is clear to me. Right? This is the method for parasummary. Sanatan had said, can you summarize these methods? Right. So for the parasummary question, the first stage, and by the way, this stage of reading applies to all of VARC. For parasummary, what we want to remember is the four options, by the way, cannot be trusted. So there are a few reasons why I can eliminate options. So I'll give you the few specific reasons. Let's say I read option A and I notice that the facts are stated correctly, right? Opinions are stated correctly. But the problem is that main point is missing. Main point is missing. So option A is incorrect because no, we aren't recording why the author spoke to us. The author spoke to us to tell us something really categorical about petitioning in democracies. It has beneficial impact on democracy, it has beneficial impact on society, and it's slightly better than elections. It's slightly fairer or more time bound than elections. So why of option A is not recorded, right? So main point is not recorded, why is not recorded. Option B, let's say the main point is correctly stated, but the facts are incorrectly stated. There's some incorrect word. So option B has a factual inaccuracy. Option C, now this is where it gets tricky. Let's say options A, and most questions are designed this way. Literally, most questions. Options A and B, most of us will eliminate. Let's say 90% of us eliminate options A and B. Then when it comes to options C and D, right, let's say that there's a problematic phrase in option C and a problematic phrase in option D. Now, what you have to do at this stage, and this is another marker for which students are more accurate versus which students are less accurate. And please remember this: how do you take decisions here? By how do you take decisions here, I'm not saying what skill you're supposed to use. You're simply supposed to compare this information. But what I mean by how do you take decisions here is actually about, do you stay calm? Do you now compare information correctly, or simply do you reread in circles in a chaotic way? If you're going to do this, which is reread in circles in a chaotic way, then how do you take decisions here? Badly, right? If you're just doing this is not a good idea. What you want to do is, you notice something problematic here and here, you go looking for that information in the passage, right? And you say, okay, option C is unacceptable because even though it's saying something problematic, just like option D, I don't find any evidence for option C. So option C is invalid. Whereas option D is a reduction of the passage, right? Option D is a reduction. D is a reduction of the passage. We agree that. It's a reduction means there is some loss of information. There's probably compression of information which looks different. You're probably taking 4 or 5 words and replacing them with one word. So it looks different, sounds different. But it's the only acceptable way to summarize the paragraph. What does that mean? Option D is the only possible way where the main point is recorded accurately. The facts, if present, if the option has facts, are presented accurately, and opinions, if they're present, are presented accurately. This is what I want you to do with options, right? So I think the method is fairly clear to all of you. Please, let's start with the first question. Let me just here go through some of the. Good evening, Rishabh. Let's start with the first question here. I just want all of you all to go through this, and remember to be methodical. I want all of you all to know which words in each option are problematic, if there are any such words. Please start. Others to type in your answers. All right. So, okay, I'll just wait for a few moments. I'm guessing some are still solving. I'll wait for a minute more. All right. So, what we are looking to do here is, I've already discussed what has to be there in a somewhat of an ideal summary. The ideal summary should obviously mention the topic, so this is a given, right? But the ideal summary should record that petitions are what petitions are, right? So definition, their impact on democracy, right? And a comparison with elections. Ideally, the option should contain all these elements, and it should state these elements accurately, right? So what we have done first is we have figured out clearly what the passage is about. Now let's go through each option. And like I said, we are going to find words in each option that are problematic. Let's start with D, right? Which words in D are problematic? So citizens become less inclined to petitioning as it enables vocal citizens to shape political agendas. But this needs to change to strengthen democracies today. So multiple reasons why D is incorrect. First is citizens become less inclined to petitioning. This is a factual inaccuracy, not stated in the passage, right? This needs to change to strengthen democracies today. Nothing like this stated. Main point is missing, which is what role petitioning plays, why it's important to a democracy. So importance of petitioning missing, main point missing. So two or three reasons why option D is incorrect. Similarly, let's look at option B. What problem do we notice in option B? Petitioning is definitely more representative of the collective voice. And functioning of democratic government could improve if we relied more on petitioning rather than holding periodic elections. So, petitioning is definitely more representative. We are told elections are fall short of representative democracy. So, elections fall far short of uh, representative democracy. I'm just teaching you, in case you find this information and you're looking for it in the passage, a version of this we find in the passage, which is elections are considered as short of representative democracy, whereas elections are also episodic. Comparison petitioning is expeditious, this is quick. But we can't say definitely more representative of the collective voice. This is one opinion which is a little problematic. And the functioning of democratic government could improve. Now, this is the real problematic statement. Democratic government could improve. Factual inaccuracy not stated in the passage. Option B is definitely incorrect, right? So let's say with B and C, we found some specific problems. If you notice, again, I'm not taking this decision quickly. I'm not taking this decision based on some general description in my mind. I'm using specific words to drive these decisions. So B and D are incorrect. Let's look at A and C. Any problems you notice in option C? Many of you have gone with option C. Any problems in option C? Any specific words which scream out to you? As what I told you was, I'm looking for a version of the passage. This version of the passage should include the main point accurately. It has to include the main point accurately. If facts are to be included, they should be mentioned accurately. If opinions are included, they should be mentioned accurately. This has to be present. What problems do you see in option C? Elections are not discussed. Now I'm looking for, that's true. One, something could be overlooked in option C, one word could be overlooked. I'm looking for some more specific reason. Like, is the main point mentioned? Main point was political petitions, or petitions are important. Petitions help democracy, right? So main point isn't mentioned accurately. That's one problem. Are facts stated accurately? That's another problem. So I'm just looking for, yes, ideal form, Harshal. Absolutely right. Two words, right? When I read option C, by giving citizens greater control over shaping political and democratic agendas, this is true, right? Citizens can shape agendas, right? This is correct. uh, Political petitions are invaluable, right? Invaluable means they are extremely important. If you notice, we are told that they shape democracy, they recruit citizens, uh, they, in the end, we are told they are not episodic. Voice of the people needs to be heard. So extremely important is opinion wise, not an opinion that is directly stated. So this word is a little bit of a problem. Notice what I did. I read the word and I went back to the passage and I checked. And what I told you was, at this stage, if you're comparing two options, and if you're quickly going to, because you feel like you're losing out on time, instead of investing another 15 or 20 seconds in getting the right answer, you jump to a choice. Invaluable is a word that should be checked And if you didn't check invaluable, like Harshal was saying, you should check ideal form of democracy, right? No mention here. No mention of what is an ideal form. If I was to ask you from the passage, what is an ideal form of democracy? We can't state that. So this is invalid. So two reasons which all of us could find, right? These words, all of us could find as problematic. We can't say that we didn't read those words. The other, these are factual elements which are incorrect. The other word that makes option C incorrect is a little difficult to find, is political petitions. This is like specific petitions. It's like saying, let's say if I replace this with scientific petitions, equally incorrect, right? We aren't saying a specific kind of petition, we are saying petitioning in general. So this idea of political petitions also makes C incorrect. By the way, these are previous year questions that we are discussing. Option A is the right choice. A says petitioning has been important to democratic functioning. This is right. Important. Notice how important is way better than invaluable. Invaluable would mean it's critical. Without this, democratic functioning could stop, right? So invaluable would be extreme. It supplements electoral process. So they support procedural democracy, right? So it supplements electoral process by enabling ongoing engagement with the government. Why is it ongoing engagement? Now notice what sounds new about option A. By the way, we'll just say B, C, and D are incorrect. Everyone, let's, for the sake of discussion, say B, C, and D are incorrect, and everyone agrees with that. The problem with option A is that this idea of ongoing engagement sounds incorrect. But I told you, if you are compressing information, there'll be loss of information or there'll be some change in information, right? And that we notice here that elections are episodic, whereas petitioning is expeditious. Expeditious is whenever, right? So it's an ongoing process. Option A is the correct choice. If you notice, with each option I've marked words which are incorrect. There are some higher level difficult words also, sorry, problematic words also, but option A is the correct choice here. All right, so that's our first question. Now let me move on quickly to the second question. This is taking way longer than what I'd intended, but I hope the method of solving is clear to everyone. All right, so now let's think of why is the parajumble odd, and paracompletion one question type. What do I mean by all of this being one question type? What are we being tested on? So I told you all of these are linked together in some specific way. They are trying to assess some fundamental reading skill, right? So what is this fundamental reading skill that parajumble odd, and paracompletion are checking, right? So let me go back to the prior skill that we figured out. We figured out that there is a main point given by the author, right? The main point here is recorded in both these words marked in green. If you put these words together, you'll get the main point of the author, right? So we figured out the main point of the author, and this was the skill needed for the para summary question. Now with the parajumble odd or paracompletion question, what we have to do is they take this information for these three question types, parajumble, odd, or paracompletion. They take this information from a longer passage or some longer set of information usually, right? One paragraph from this information is chosen. So in short, whatever this paragraph is had a longer main point, right? Has a shorter main point of that paragraph only. This information is then arranged in the case of parajumble and parajumble odd. This information is arranged slightly in a new order, right? Now, this order A, B, C, D in the case of parajumble odd is made by the examiner. This order is supposed to jumble the main point, correct? So this new order for the parajumble question or the parajumble odd question, this new order represents a jumbled, um, a, a mixed version of the original main point. So what is expected out of us is we convert this to BDCA. Let's say this is the sequence. We convert this to BDCA. So what we are doing is we are taking this thing which we learned, which is to figure out the main point of the author. We are figuring out that main point for these four sentences. And we are saying the main point is best expressed in this fashion. Correct? So this tells us that sentence B is connected to sentence, and sentence C is connected to sentence D, and sentence C is then connected to sentence A, right? The reason why I've marked these in different color code, is to tell you that these connections between sentences B and D, between sentences D and C, right, and between C and A, these connections are inviolable, meaning that this is the only way to connect these sentences. This is the only way to rearrange the main point of the author to this correct order, right? So the fundamental reading skill that they are checking here is take a bunch of mixed information, rearrange it in the right order based on what connects those sentences together and what achieves the best expression of the main point of the author. This is what is checked in a para-jumble question. This is what is checked in a para-jumble odd question and a para-completion question. Let me tell you how it's slightly different for a para-jumble odd question. For a para-jumble odd question, you get 5 sentences and you're asked which of these sentences is odd. That means, let's say if I say sentence 4 is odd, that means that suppose the sequence was 2, 3, 1, 5. This means that sentence 4 does not play any role before, after, or in between this sequence anywhere. Sentence 4 cannot be placed in this sequence anywhere. It's odd with regards to the main point of the author. Sentence 4 has no role with regards to the main point of the author. So the right answer here would be sentence 4. But by picking sentence 4 in a para-jumble odd question, what we are saying is that sentence has no role before, after, or in between the main point of the author. Right? And same thing for a para-completion question. We're supposed to find why those sentences in the paragraph are connected to each other, why some of the options are odd, and why one option fits perfectly in, like a para-jumble question. So in short, para-jumble odd, and para-completion are checking one fundamental reading skill, which is can you rearrange the main point of the author in the right way using information in that passage. All right. Let's keep this idea in mind. I just want all of you all to solve the first para-jumble. Now the method for solving a para-jumble. All right. The method for solving a para-jumble. Suppose you get a 4-sentence para-jumble in the exam. The most important factor, I think, and I mean, I've discussed this in a lot of classes with a lot of students, and I've asked them over time whether this is actually true. But I think the biggest factor to accuracy here is actually reading from 4 to 1. The reason is this idea of 1 to 4 is the worst possible idea to read these sentences. This idea, this arrangement is made by the examiner. This arrangement is to achieve 2 things possibly, right? One is confuse us about what the main point actually is, right? So give us an incorrect idea of the main point, right? Or second is to create a new main point separate only, create a new fictional, let's say, or a new reality, create a new main point completely. So this would make sense in a completely different way, which is not what we want it to become in our head. So the first thing that I want all of you all to do is to read from 4 to 1. While reading from 4 to 1, I'm looking for 2 things. First is I'm looking for sentence connections. If you notice, these color coded things that I've marked here are sentence connections. Their sentences connected in a certain way with each other. Excuse me. And that's the only possible way to connect those sentences. and there is some topic overlap. So what I'm doing is I'm reading from 4 to 1. I'm looking for ways in which these sentences overlap with each other, right? Ways in which this is connected to each other. And based on this information that I find, I say 4 2 is my first pair. It tells me that sentences 4 and 2 are connected in a certain way. Then I start looking for what could go before and after. And then I realized that the remaining two sentences, which is 1 3, go after 4 2, right? So 4 2 1 3 would be the sequence. This is the broad method. You read from 4 to 1, you look for things which overlap and get connected in a specific way. Based on this observation, remember my words, we are looking for specific information for every decision, right? So look for that specific information. Again, if you're arranging these based on what sounds like a opening statement, what sounds like a closing statement, all of this is like a really bad approach to the question type, because examiners know this. They choose or create questions which sound like good opening statements, closing statements, but they're actually incorrect. So that's your method for the first parajumble question. Please, let's start with this. I'm sort of running behind time, but it's important that we cover each question type. Let's start with this, everyone. Right. So let's start with the fourth sentence. I'll start solving the questions. I know some of you are still solving, but like I said, we need to solve these within a given time frame. And I actually need to cover two more question types apart from just the parajumble. So we have to discuss parajumble odd and para completion as well. Let's start by reading the fourth sentence. I'm trying to achieve two things by reading the sentence. One is figure out generally what is the point of the sentence, the author's main point, and if there is any sentence connection type word or phrase that I can find. So the literary work has two poles. This tells me that this has possibly been discussed prior. Possibly, we can't be sure in this case. The literary work has two poles, which we might call artistic and aesthetic. Artistic refers to the text created by the author, and aesthetic to the realization accomplished by the reader. So this the author is trying to draw to this idea of two poles of literary work. One is artistic, which is author, and aesthetic, which is the reader. The reader plays a role, the author plays a role. So I've simply looked at information which is topic based. Right now, if I find similar topic based information in some of the other sentences, maybe I can make a connection. Another piece of information that we'll find in sentence 3 from this polarity. This is really important, right? This is a sentence connection type of keyword. So I'm using topic based keywords or sentence based keywords to make some pair first. This polarity tells me that prior to sentence 3, ideally in the sentence immediately prior to sentence 3, some kind of polarity with regards to literary work would be discussed. There's a good chance it's referring to sentence 4 only, but I'm not going to fix up this pair until I read all the sentences. So I've noticed this polarity. From this polarity, it follows that literary work cannot be completely identical with the text. It must lie halfway between the two. So literary work lies halfway between the two. All right. Sentence 2 says the convergence of text and reader, right? So this means that whatever was the artistic author's take and the aesthetic reader's take has now here converged. Right? The convergence of text and reader brings the literary work into existence. What is completing or fulfilling this literary work? And this convergence is not to be identified either with the reality of the text or with the individual disposition of the reader. So, literary work has two poles. This polarity we are discussing, the artistic pole and the aesthetic pole. Here, convergence of text and reader, we notice some overlap as well. Sentence 1 says the work is more than the text. The text only takes on life, so text only comes alive when it's realized, and furthermore, the realizations is by no means independent. All right. So, what we start with first is we had two kinds of clues: topic based and sentence connection based. Always remember this is the preference of us making the first mandatory pair, the sentence connection or syntactical connection, right? Syntactical basically simply tells us of rules which lead to sentence formation. So 4-3 would be the first pair, right? And 4-3 tells us that literary work has two poles, and this polarity, it follows that literary work is not just the text, it's between the text and reader. It's between the text and reader. So these two are connected in a certain way. We don't see any sentence, one or two, getting between these two sentences. Now, what we start looking for is which information could go before or after sentence 1 or sentence 2. Sentence 1 or 2 don't seem to be going before 4-3, right? Uh, we are told in sentence 1, the subject of sentence 1 is the work, the literary work. The subject of sentence 2, the subject of sentence 2 is the convergence of text and reader, right? So prior to sentence 1, we should ideally be discussing the work. And prior to sentence 2, we should ideally be discussing convergence of text and reader. Right? Okay. So let's look at prior to sentence 1, the work. If you notice here, literary work cannot be completely identical with the text. The reality lies somewhere between the two. So sentence 1 we'll try placing here. Then what happens is we are told in 4-3 about this polarity and how the work only takes on life when it's realized, when the realization is accomplished by the reader. So 4-3-1 are connected. And then we know sentence 2 cannot be placed here. Sentence 2 we try placing it here. Sentence 2 talks about the convergence. No means independent of individual disposition. So no means independent tells us that the prior sentence was discussing the convergence of individual reader and the text. So the right sequence is 4-3-1-2. What I want all of you all to notice is this connection of this polarity with literary work having two poles. The work cannot be completely identical. This tells us the work is more than the text, right? And the convergence comes from no means independent of individual dispositions. 4-3-1-2 is the sequence in this case. Some of you have gotten it right. These are, like I said, previous year questions. The main thing that I want all of you all to retain is that I used a specific method to figure out the correct sequence. That specificity is going to help us be more accurate. The more you can maintain that specificity under pressure, the more your accuracy. Let's try and solve a parajumble odd question. Now you're going to get 5 sentences, and similarly you'll find some pattern across some sentences, right? And you'll say that maybe 5, 1, 2, 3 is connected in a sequence. Notice what I said, that this is questionable, this is maybe. What I am 100% sure of, however, that 4 is odd. When I say 4 is odd, I don't say 4 is odd simply because it's discussing something else. 4 may be discussing what is going on here, but 4 is not immediately in a position where it can be placed anywhere here. Meaning, if 5, 1, 2, 3 is a possible sequence, this is not confirmed, right? This is questionable. We know that sentence 4 cannot be placed anywhere here. That is what we are certain about, right? The solving method remains the same. We start reading from 5 to 1. We look for patterns which appear. These patterns we try and fix together in some sequence. The sequence is not that important for the parajumble odd question. In fact, you don't really have to make the full sequence either. You just need to know that 4 does not play any role in the narration, in the coherent, which is the meaningful narration of the main point of the author, right? Let's start with this question. All right, please get started. All right. Let me start with this question. And again, I'm going to read from 5 to 1. I'm going to look for some evidence-based pattern which emerges across these sentences. I'm going to come up with a possible sequence, which is, we don't need to complete this sequence for the parajumble odd question, right? So this can be a work in progress type of sequence. But what we do know is one of these is definitely not a part of the sequence. We are trying to identify that. Let's start with 5. One of the most fascinating human capacities is the ability to perceive and interpret other people's behavior in terms of their mental states. So we're looking at the topic of discussion is most fascinating human capacity, which is to perceive others' mind. All right. Now, so this is, we just noticed some topic based discussion. Again, sentence 4 has a specific clue. This is that kind of clue that we have to start with ideally. This is a sentence connection clue. This capacity tells us that prior to sentence 4, we are discussing a specific capacity. Sounds like sentence 5 only, we can't be sure. This capacity develops from early beginnings in the first year of life and often effortless understanding of others' thoughts, feelings, and intentions. So we are told when this capacity begins. So sentence 5 told us generally about some fascinating human capacity. Sentence 4 is trying to answer the question when this starts. All right, and we have noticed some clues in sentence 4. Sentence 3 says, though we must speculate about its evolutionary origin. So it is again a great sentence clue. It tells us prior to sentence 3, whatever we are discussing can be referred to as it, and we can speculate its evolutionary origin. We do have indications that the capacity evolved sometime in the last few million years. So we know it is actually referring to the capacity. It is actually referring to the capacity. So even in sentence 3, we are discussing the capacity. Sentence 4 discusses this capacity. Sentence 3 discusses this capacity. They could be in some particular order. Sentence 2 says it is a theory of the mind. Okay, so let me actually all right, these are the clues or the kind of overlap that we've seen. Sentence 2 has this clue it is a theory of the mind, though some scholars prefer to call it mentalizing or mind reading. And about it, we are being told important for the development of one's cognitive abilities. So, whatever X is, right? X is required for brain development, right? So 2 is trying to answer, we are talking about sentence 2 here. 2 is trying to answer X is required for brain development. 2 is trying to answer why is X important. We don't know if X here refers to this capacity or not, because X, which is it here, I'm talking about it as X, this is also being referred as theory of the mind. So we don't know if theory of the mind is the same as human capacity. So 2 already looks like it's a problematic sentence. 1 says having an appreciation for the workings of another person's mind is considered a prerequisite for natural language acquisition, etc., etc. So knowing what the other person is thinking is important for learning languages, right? That is what the author is talking about. So let's say we find a mandatory pair like 5 4. This capacity has to refer to this capacity here, and this is the only way to arrange these sentences. We know that sentence 3 is also talking about this capacity, possibly here. We can't really be too sure of this. Or we can have an arrangement like this: 5431 or 5413 or something of this nature. We can't be too sure of these. What we can be extremely sure of, and this is what is checked in the exam, is that 2 is odd. We know for a fact that 2 cannot be placed here or anywhere in between here. Same thing applies in this case. So therefore, 2 is odd, right? 2 is not a part of the sequence. So what we say here is that the 2 is referring to it, and it is being called as important for development of brain. This idea that it is important for brain development is not coherently connected to this possible sequence of 5413 or sorry, uh, 5431, right? Whatever the sequence may be, 2 is not a part of that sequence, right? So option 2 is odd. These questions are MCQ type. No, they're not. They are TITA type, Tejasvi. And no, you can't. It can't be a mix and match. It has to be a specific order. I think some of you are probably doing the question type for the first time. Please explain the first sentence. The first sentence is talking about an appreciation for the workings of another person's mind. This thematically overlaps with the ability to perceive and interpret other people's behavior in terms of their mind, right? So I know 5 4 is definitely connected, then maybe sentence 1, which is why this is a little questionable, and then 3, right? Or it could be 5 4 3 1. But in any case, these sentences are talking about how ability to understand one's thoughts is recorded into evolutionary origin. 2 talks about a certain theory of mind. It's not a part of either of these sequences. I hope that's clear. All right. Prarthana, I hope that's clear. 4. All right. So I hope those of you who went with other options, it's clear. 2 is odd. Tejasvi, I think you're confusing the question type. It is not a MCQ question type. It's a TITA question type. What you're going to get, is uh, numpad, right? And you'll be expected to key in one, in this case, just one number, which is 2, right? So there's no margin for error as such. All right. Now let's, we're already beyond time, but I hope this is of some value. So let me just go ahead and extend the time for the class, and let's try and solve this last question. There is a sentence that is missing in the paragraph below. Look at the paragraph, decide in which option blank the following sentence would best fit. This is the sentence. This is a example of a sentence. This is just for me to show you how the question looks, and then for me to briefly discuss the method. This is how the question would look to you. Okay, there would be a sentence given, and we would have to fit it in one of these blanks. Excuse me. So the method for solving this question, this is a para-jumble, a para-completion question, or a fill-in-the-blank para-completion question. Call it what you want. First, we start by reading this sentence. And just like we knew that 4 is referring to this capacity, 4 has to be connected to some other sentence. This capacity tells me that 4 has to be connected to some other sentence, or 4 is odd. This capacity connects with human capacity. So similarly, I need to look for whether there are words like this capacity or any other words, we'll call this sentence X, any other words prior to sentence X or after sentence X will make some connection, right? So I'm looking for some words here that will make a connection before or after sentence X. I'm trying to figure out this sentence first. And then what you want to do is just take a look at the paragraph. Each sentence in this paragraph, let's say this word will be in some way connected to this word. And then there may be a gap. We don't know if there's a gap. And then it's connected to this word and then this word and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to say is just like a para jumble question, I told you earlier that all these question types are the same. They're looking for one fundamental reading skill, which is us connecting and rearranging information in a certain way. The same thing is being tested. In fact, you're being asked, let me clear all of this. You're being asked right now to complete the paragraph, right? You're being asked, where does sentence X in this paragraph fit? So that means you need to know that if I place sentence X here in this position, then it will be odd. It won't play a correct role. It does not play a clear role. However, if I place sentence X in this position, then it perfectly fits in. So what you're trying to do is it's a combination of parajumble and parajumble odd questions. This is what a paracompletion or fill in the blank question is. So what I want you to think of that original sentence X as, I want you to think of this sentence as something that you need to place into the passage and see if it's odd at certain instances and whether it fits in at a certain place, right? That's what we are trying to achieve. So that's the method. Please get started. I'll discuss the question shortly. Excuse me. Please get started. All right. Okay. So all the questions that we have solved today so far are previous year questions. I chose this question because it has this this philosophical cut. It has that specific word which actually helps us place that option correctly. It helps me illustrate. This question is a previous year question in 2022 question, right? And it helps me illustrate that there is some piece of evidence here which tells us that there is only one place the sentence can go. In the we'll call the sentence X. In the sentence prior to sentence X, there is something philosophical, the philosophical cut at one's core beliefs, values, and way of life is difficult. So there is some philosophical outlook that negatively impacts one's core beliefs or way of life. The reason why I'm calling it negatively impacts is I'm trying to be as generic as possible. I don't really want to use my description, but just a vague understanding of what that sentence tells us could be prior to it. There is something philosophical that affects our core beliefs in a negative way. It makes it difficult for us to understand or accept our core beliefs and way of life. So now that I've identified and figured out which is a key word in this sentence, I start by deciding where to place it. So we start by reading the paragraph. The paragraph starts with the idea the experience of reading philosophy is often disquieting. So philosophy can be disquieting, problematic, right? It might make us feel uncomfortable. By when reading philosophy, the values around which one has heretofore organized one's life may come to look provincial, flatly wrong, or even evil. When I say reread sentences, right, I'll just illustrate this once. And by the way, those of you who find reading challenging, please look at my prior classes. I've covered reading in depth in those RC classes. When you reread a sentence that is long, reread it, always reread it with specific attention to specific words. You're just trying to track the subject of the sentence. The subject here is when reading philosophy, one's values may be wrong, may seem wrong as evil. This is what makes philosophy uncomfortable or disquieting. So, this philosophical cut at one's core beliefs, values, and way of life is difficult enough. So, this philosophical, let's replace this with outlook. I'm simply trying to explain, don't try and do this in the exam. This philosophical outlook at one's core beliefs. This tells me that this sentence could fit in here, right? So this is one idea. Let's consider this as a possible but possibly problematic. We need to see what the next sentence is. When beliefs previously held as truths are rendered implausible, new beliefs, values, and way of living may be required. What's worse, philosophers admonish each other to remain unsuited until such a time as defensible new answer is revealed or constructed. All right. So now you notice here that what's worse is being said. What's worse compared to what? Compared to what negative thing came prior, right? So maybe we can have this sentence X with this philosophical cut placed here as well, right? So this philosophical outlook or cut may refer to philosophy proving values as evil, or this philosophical cut may refer to previously held truths as implausible. Correct? So this sentence can refer to or go in this position or go in this position as of now. Let's look at three. What's worse, philosophers admonish each other, etc. Sometimes philosophical writing is even strictly critical, does not even attempt to provide an alternative summary, tearing down a cultural or conceptual citadel. The reader of philosophy. So there is no this cut happening here. So three does not go here. And then sentence four also prior to that, you don't find any such cut. So you're trying to pick between these two sentences. So, right, I'm just looking at some of the answers that you've given. Sorry about that. Which What is going to help you decide between 1 and 2? If you're deciding between 1 versus 2, do you place sentence X here or do you place it here? Is there a word or phrase in the prior sentence? So we'll say, I'll just mark the sentences prior and after blanks 1 and 2. So prior to blank 1, we have this sentence, and after we have this sentence. And prior to blank 2, we have this when sentence, and after we have this sentence. What pieces of evidence do you find in each of these that tells us which position to place this in? Any piece of evidence, everyone? Difficult enough, right? So, what does difficult enough tell you, Mehul? Others, if you're choosing between options 1 and 2, what words help you make that choice? All right, I'm just looking for some kind of comparison. It gets worse. So, Harshal has pointed out something. So, we're looking for sentences before and after, right? So, Harshal has pointed out that what's worse is of some value to us. That's right. What else could be of value to us to make the choice? All right. Semantics that the philosopher makes. The phrase new beliefs, values may be required. The word words. Okay. So we have a few set of clues. One is that it could be placed here. I just want what I wanted all of you all to learn to do with this was that in the exam you're going to get a situation where you have to compare between two decisions. We know these are definitely not choices that we would make. Between these two, what evidence do we have? Here you have in sentence one, in position one, you have this idea that prior to that sentence, there should be a philosophical attack. We'll call this a philosophical attack on one's core beliefs, which is difficult, right? A philosophical attack at one's core beliefs, which is difficult. You notice here when reading philosophy, the values around which one has heretofore organized one's life may look provincial, flatly wrong, and evil, right? So this could be attack. When beliefs previously held as truths are rendered implausible, new beliefs and values and ways of living are required. Now, the problem that, let's refer to this as sentence X. The problem that sentence X will face if it goes here is not in the sentence prior much, is in the sentence after. If you notice what sentence after is saying, sentence after is saying new beliefs, values, and ways of living would be required, right? Nothing here talks of new ways of values and living would be required after this, right? So that's one thing. There's some disconnect with this sentence here. So there is some kind of dissonance. Dissonance means there is some kind of incorrect fit. Now we try placing it here. The philosophical attack still applies. Beliefs previously held as truths are rendered implausible. So we still have this prior fit, right? Also, we have the other fit, which Harshal said and others said. What's worse, philosophers admonish to each other to remain unsuited until such time as a defensible new answer is revealed or constructed. So we are told that even the fact that previously held beliefs are no longer valuable, philosophers don't even allow to construct new belief systems. New things or new defensible ways to answer these questions are not allowed to be constructed. So not only do you, what happens if we place, let me repeat that carefully. What happens if we place sentence X in this position, right? Is that it tells us prior that there is some philosophical cut, right? So this is great. And it tells us after that there is no solution allowed. No such immediate solution allowed. Philosophers admonish each other to remain unsuited until such a time as. So that is what is worse. Not only are you in a difficult spot, you're also not allowed to create a new set of beliefs that will allow you to be adjusted in this way of life. So the right answer here is this, which is option 2. All right. This would be incorrect. The right option is option 2. It's a previous year question. All right. So, right. We are discussing this detail. Do you have the time to think like this? Saurav, that's a good question. Right. Worse. Most of you said worse. All right. I was just looking for some words. So I just want to cover a few things about what Saurav is saying and also in general. When I say be methodical and be analytical, now the choice is between, let me just use this question and let me take 2 minutes of your time and then bring the class to an end, right? Is in a RC question, you'll get 4 options, or a para summary question, you'll get 4 options. This is a better way for me to actually make this comparison. Now, what is going to happen in most of our RC or para summary or even the other question types is there'll be some decisions which are very easily made by us. 90% will say option A is incorrect. 90% will say option B also is incorrect. Right? This will be easy. When it comes to this, that's when our decision making needs to be on point. When I'm giving you this detailed explanation slowly, that doesn't mean you have to slow yourself down in the exam. What I want you to learn to do is to look for a specific piece of information quickly and then check for them. Right? Ideal form of representative democracy not stated here. I looked for it. I know this is problematic. It's incorrect. So at this stage, because we are running short of time, instead of actually giving ourselves 20 seconds of focus time, we end up giving ourselves 15 seconds of erratic rereading. This is problematic. What I want you to do is actually give yourself specific time for this specific decision. To find this word ideal, I'll take somewhere close to 10 to 15 seconds. I know there itself that option C is not great. And if you remember, in this case, B and D were really easy for us to eliminate, right? It had these words. C had some problematic word as well. And then we had to make a choice. A seems to be the clear choice. So to bring us back to what Saurav was saying, there is enough time for you to solve all the questions in the VARC section, all the possible questions in a methodical way. And this is what people who are going to get more than 99 percentile are going to be able to do. They'll be able to do this, that is remain methodical, even if the questions are really tough, even if they're running short of time, whatever happens, their ability to use their skills, right? Whatever skills they've learned, like we studied some skills in today's class, they'll have the ability to use these skills in an optimal way, right? So my point with the class was sort of to give you specific details to pay attention to, and then using them within the time frame is something that you'll have to practice. All of you all will have to practice. For speed, like I discussed in the prior class, speed is a very important thing. and it requires practice. Uh, I have low accuracy in VARC. What should be my optimal strategy? Flash, if you're taking the exam, which is in 2 weeks' time, there are very few things you can do. But like I've mentioned in the prior class, there are these short tests that I have asked students to do, and those are really beneficial. Those of you who see a gap in their scores will benefit from those. So I've spent some time in discussing those in the prior class. Today's class I've extended by a long time. I hope it has been of some value to you. This is the last time I think I'll be seeing you for a general VARC, like a specific method-based discussion. If we meet again, great. Otherwise, all the best to all of you all. Please remember to be methodical. If you have any other doubts, please leave them in the comment section, and we'll be glad to address those if possible. Right. So thank you, everyone. All the best, and I'll see you in the next class. Good night.